David, if you'd like to read a little sampler. David Sanders had short fiction published in journals and anthologies that include Baltimore Review, the Laurel Review, Sycamore Review, and many more. His short play has been produced at Brick Playhouse and an interactive theater company where David was founding director of the Best of Philly reading series, Writing Aloud. A little taste of it.
Great, thanks. I'm going to read a short excerpt from a story that is not the story that's in the anthology, but it's from an unpublished news story. But it does involve some of the same characters as the story that's in the collection, and the same setting and situation. That setting is Kenya in East Africa in the mid-60s, just after independence. And the two main characters in this were also in the story in the collection. The father is a Quaker missionary who's there after independence to help teach teachers in the new system, and his son. And this scene takes place sort of in the middle of the story, and their father and son are en route on a drive into Kisumu. It's about a half-hour drive through the jungle to the closest town, Kisumu. Mark sat silently in the passenger seat. He clutched tightly to the armrest to keep from bouncing about on the cracked brown leather. His father concentrated on maneuvering the car down its winding route through the jungle mountainside. Every few meters, he swerved to avoid another of the frequent holes and ruts that plagued Busara Road. Neither had spoken for several minutes. Mark stared out the window on his left to watch the dark blur of passing jungle. The trees abruptly disappeared, replaced by a sunlit maize field back against the mountainside. Tall, even rows of stalks paraded past the car for several seconds before transforming into a cluster of shamba huts beside a narrow stream. Then the mud and thatched huts gave way, swallowed again by dark jungle. Busara Road took a sharp curve, dropped into a gully, and straightened into a narrow ravine that cut like a panga slice through the jungle. Mark stared into the trees and vines, feeling lulled into an uneasy drowsiness. The landscape transformed again, this time into a broad green field of tea to his left. On his father's side, the mountain dropped off steeply beyond the edge of the road. The car seat scratched at the underside of Mark's leg. He fingered the frame cracks in the leather. "Don't pick," his father warned. "I'm not," Mark shot back. His father glanced over, surprised. "Careful with thy tone of voice." "Or what?" Mark folded his arms and leaned against the door. "You'll hit me again?" Mark hunched his shoulders to protect against another blow. Instead, his father pulled the car onto a narrow slope of dirt beside the field and stopped. Mark continued to stare out his window. Waves of tea plants stretched before him, row upon row of squat, thick bushes. The field was punctuated by bent-over women, their bald black heads floating like balls on the green sea, and their faded dresses reflecting the colors of earth and sky. All had sacks slung around their necks, and several had infants strapped to their backs as well. They moved steadily down the rows, their hands shifting constantly between bush and sack. "Mark," his father began, then halted. On their right, the road dropped off into a deep valley. From somewhere out of view, a soft commotion of cowbells drifted up the hillside. The clamor drew louder and closer. As father and son watched, the bony head of a cow rose above the edge of the road. The animal scrambled over the ridge and tumbled onto the dirt, followed by another dozen or so equally scrawny cows. The herd spread out and filled the road in front of Mark. At the rear, two young shirtless boys appeared, shouting and snapping switches at the cows to keep them from wandering into the tea. "Last night," Mark's father tried again, raising his voice over the din. He turned to face his son, but Mark turned back to the window view. The morning sun lit the rows of tea, which stretched all the way to the distant foot of the jungle-draped hillside. The air was crisp, and it resonated with the lowing of cows, the clanging of bells, and the shouts of children. Inside the car, silence hung heavily. Mark watched the tea pickers. He noticed a small boy in the field, younger than himself, working alongside the women. Mark imagined himself out there, picking tea. An intense longing swelled in him to be an African boy out in the middle of a field with no cares except picking tea. I've never hit you before, have I? Mark was startled by his father's voice. For a moment, he'd forgotten about him. He remained silent, watching the tea pickers bend in the field, the cows shuffle in the road, and the faraway tops of jungled trees sway in the breeze. Yes, you have, Mark finally responded. He didn't look at his dad. Instead, he sat forward and watched an elderly African man navigate a path up the dirt road through the cows. The shirtless boys continued flicking their switches. Sometimes you spank me, he added. His dad considered this. That's true. On the bottom sometimes, but not hard, right? And never on the face. Mark didn't answer. Never like last night, have I? He shook his head. That was a very bad thing I did, Mark. A very wrong thing, and I'm very, very sorry I hurt you. Mark heard a tremor in his father's voice. He thought of his mother. Mom never hit me. They sat in silence a while longer. Hurting you, his dad finally continued, it's the last thing in the world I would ever want. You understand that, right? His father's voice trailed off. Two African women in long yellow dresses appeared beside the car. With baskets balanced on their heads, they glanced in the open window, whispered to one another, giggled, and continued on their way. Mark watched them weave gracefully past the cows, now munching grass at the side of the road. Mark started tracing cracks in the car seat again. He kept his head bowed. It wasn't even my fault, he finally managed. That doesn't matter. What I did was wrong either way. I don't know how to explain why I did what I did. His father paused and ran his fingers through the red bristles of his hair. Since your mother passed, he took a couple more breaths. It's been... He looked down at his hands clenched tightly in his lap. So when you broke Marilyn's globe, I didn't break it. When it got broken, his voice trailed off. You know it was her gift to me, and it always represented, I don't know, all those things we were going to do together. Can you understand? All those dreams, and now we never will. But regardless, it was very unfair and very wrong of me to take it out on you. So I'm asking, please, will you forgive me? Mark stared out over the field. Sunlight skimmed across the dense green fists of bushes. The sky hung blue and vast above the mountain ridge. Mark was awash in confusion. It was strange to hear his dad talk this way, so hard on himself, so apologetic. He didn't know how to respond. Well, Chief, his dad sighed after another long silence. He put the car back in gear. Will they at least think about it? About what? Forgiveness? Oh, right. Mark wasn't sure what that meant, to think about forgiveness.